Now, most of my life, I've been motivated by two things. One is scientific curiosity, and the other one is a desire to see social justice. And I learned both of these things from my parents. Over the years, I've been lucky to be able to work on projects which have allowed me to make some contribution in both of those areas. Besides being able to marry Wendy, the three things which stand out for me in my working life are, first of all, my contribution to building non-racial trade unions in South Africa in the 1970s and 80s. Secondly, being able to lead the drafting of the Firearm Control Act and seeing it through Parliament in the year 2000. And thirdly, working on South Africa's successful bid to site the Square Kilometre Array radio telescope in Southern Africa. And then, of course, the design and construction of the spectacularly successful Meerkat telescope. The other principle which I think is important is one of opportunism. Mandela said, many things look impossible until you've done them. I think one has to look beyond the horizon and say what has to be done even though it looks impossible at the moment. Can we do an objective assessment of the risks, an intuitive assessment, and say it's worth doing this, and provided we have the tenacity and we have the will and the commitment, we can succeed in it. Whatever your views are on trade unions, I think there's no doubt that the non-racial trade union movement, which grew up in South Africa from the 1970s, made a very significant contribution to the traditions of accountability, openness, civic organization, grassroots democracy, which are so important to us now.
To make it very clear to the system and to their allies that we will not stand for this. We will not stand for our people being murdered.
I think that the very important role that the union movement played in liberating us from apartheid has unfortunately been whitewashed from our history. I worked with wonderful people who were committed and dedicated and completely selfless, and learned a tremendous amount from them. People like Moses Mayakiso, Frank Bushello, Peter Dainchi. There's a whole range of people who haven't been recognized but who made a tremendous contribution to our liberation. The second thing I'm proud of is the drafting and the passing through Parliament of the Firearm Control Act. It was very energetically implemented after 2000 by the South African Police Service, and it had a significant effect on firearm mortality. Unfortunately, after that, there was a bad decision from the High Court that said that it was unconstitutional to make firearm owners relicense their weapons. But the Constitutional Court has now reversed the High Court decision and has said you do have to relicense firearms. It is constitutional, and I'm hoping we'll again see a reduction in firearm mortality, which is such a critical issue in our country. The project which I've enjoyed most has been the bid to site the Square Kilometre Array radio telescope in Southern Africa and the design and construction of the Meerkat telescope by South Africans in South Africa. The site bid, when we started it, looked very unlikely. Nobody took us very seriously. That's not the case now. Everybody takes us very seriously. And I think the fact that the world's largest science infrastructure will be built in Africa has been a source of great pride. The spectacularly successful Meerkat telescope was launched in July. The images which were shown there at the launch of the center of our Milky Way galaxy and of some giant distant radio galaxies were really very exciting. I was lucky to be able to do my PhD at Cambridge in the Cavendish Laboratory at a time when the 1 mile telescope and the 5 kilometre telescope were coming into operation. These were revolutionary telescopes, and everything we saw with them was new and interesting. And the wealth of images that I could wander around and look at were what allowed me to make the connections that allowed me with Julia Riley to develop the Fanaroff-Riley classification of radio galaxies and quasars. I think the images and spectra that will come from the Meerkat telescope will be the same for our young astronomers now. There'll be so much that is new and so much that is interesting. They will be able to make connections, they will be able to make new discoveries. A lot of them will be serendipitous discoveries. It's a very exciting time. There's also been tremendous sustained support over 15 years from the Department of Science and Technology and its ministers and the National Research Foundation. And I must thank in particular Naledi Pandor, Derek Hanekom, Rob Adam, Phil Njwacha, Kotso Mokheli, Albert van Jaarsveld, Malapo Kobela, Kishan Singh. They've played a wonderful role. Without their support, we would not have been successful. We sometimes have a sense of inferiority about our ability to do the world's best science and technology in Southern Africa. But when you think about it, it all started here anyway. The discoveries at the Blombos Cave and Pinnacle Point have shown that technology and intellectual thought started in Southern Africa. It is appropriate that, having shown technological leadership so many thousands of years ago, the world's biggest and most exciting science infrastructure is again being built in Southern Africa. We often tend to see ourselves as having lots and lots of problems, and we get quite gloomy. One thing that's very important to me is that we should see these problems as opportunities. They're challenges, yes, but they're always opportunities. And if we have the will and we have the tenacity and we work together, we can really solve any problem. We can see those problems as opportunities, we can build on them to create a great future for our country.